Welcome to my channel. Today we're exploring Malawi, a country that just a few years ago was being hailed as a significant democratic success story. But now, something's gone seriously wrong. A shocking election result has left the nation feeling betrayed and stuck in a seemingly endless political loop. So, let's try to figure out what's really going on. You can just feel it in that sentence, can't you? That's from one of our sources. Betrayal and disbelief. I mean, those are some really strong words. They tell you this election result isn't just some regular political shift. It's a moment that has people asking some tough questions about the future of their entire democracy. So, what exactly happened? Well, at the heart of it all is this absolutely stunning political reversal. You've got the current president, a preacher who came to power on this huge wave of hope, and now he's facing defeat from the very same guy he kicked out of office just 5 years ago. Yeah, the same guy who was removed in what everyone thought was a major win for democracy. Okay, so on one side you have the incumbent, Lazarus Chakwera. He's a former preacher who literally promised a national resurrection. And on the other side, his 85-year-old predecessor, Peter Mutharika. This is the man who was pushed out because of accusations of ballot tampering. And now, believe it or not, he's on the verge of making a massive comeback. And wow, when you look at the early numbers, you see just how wild this reversal is. These unofficial results are showing Mutharika with what looks like an impossible lead to overcome. This isn't just a narrow loss for the president. We're talking about a landslide that's sending shockwaves all across the nation. So how on earth did we get here? To really get why everyone is in disbelief today, we actually have to rewind the clock 5 years, back to a moment when the story of Malawi was one of incredible continent-wide optimism. This timeline right here basically maps out the whole journey from hope to total disappointment. It kicks off in 2020 with this amazing high point. Malawi's courts dare to overturn a rigged election, and Chakwera's win is seen as a great new beginning. But then look how quickly that glow just fades as the harsh reality of the economy kicks in, leading right to the despair people felt going into this election. So that promised resurrection, yeah, it never really arrived. Instead, for so many Malawians, daily life just became a brutal grind. Just imagine inflation skyrocketing to nearly 30%, waiting in line for miles just to get fuel, and watching a drought just wipe out farms. You know, when your main focus is just on surviving, all those big political promises start to feel pretty hollow, and that frustration, that's what drove this vote. Alright, so with the results looking this bad for the president, you'd think that's the end of the story, right? Nope. The story takes another turn. President Chakwera isn't going down without a fight. He's pushing back, and that's tipping the whole nation towards a potential constitutional crisis. Yeah, Chakwera's camp is basically saying, no way. They're claiming there was widespread rigging and are demanding a complete do-over. They're vowing to take this all the way to the courts, insisting Mutharika's victory is a fraud and that they'll do whatever it takes to stop him from being declared president. But here's where the story gets a little more complicated. One source pointed out a detail that kind of puts a wrinkle in those rigging claims. While a bunch of officials were arrested for irregularities, it turns out more of them were allegedly supporters of President Chakwera than his opponent. It's a small detail for sure, but it definitely makes that whole narrative of a stolen election a lot murkier. But you know, this story is about so much more than just these two men or one messy election. It's about a deeper and frankly more troubling problem facing the entire country and its democratic system. The man who was poised to lead Malawi into the future is 85 years old. Now just let that number sink in for a second. 85. Now let's put that number right next to this one, 60%. That's how many people in Malawi are under the age of 25, and right there, that's the core problem. You have a nation of young people being led by a political class old enough to be their great-grandparents. And this whole situation has created what some folks are calling a vicious loop. Voters feel totally trapped. They're stuck making a choice. That isn't about hope, it's just about being exhausted. It's like, do you stick with the new disappointment you already know? Or do you go back to the old failures from the past? And this feeling of being stuck, you see it everywhere you look. I mean, Mutharika's running mate is the very same official who was in charge of that discredited 2019 election. And even though women are the majority of voters, their representation in government is still incredibly low. It doesn't feel like moving forward. It feels like hitting the rewind button. And look, this is exactly why what's happening in Malawi matters way beyond its own borders. It's become this powerful and honestly pretty sobering cautionary tale for other nations all across the continent. The key issue here is this idea called democratic fatigue. It's a fancy term, but what it really boils down to is this. It's what happens when people just lose faith that voting can actually make their lives better. Elections stop being about hope and renewal, and they just become this ritual of resignation. And that fatigue? It has real consequences. When democracy keeps failing to deliver on the basics like jobs, food, or just a sense of dignity, it creates a vacuum. And that's a huge opening for populist leaders to come in and challenge the whole system, promising a total break from what they call failed Western models. At the end of the day, Malawi's election forces us to ask a really profound question, and not just for one country, but for a whole continent with the youngest population in the world. Is the future really going to be found by looking to the past, or is it finally time to demand a new generation of leaders with the guts to break the cycle for good?